There's a new book out that you need to know about, and I'm just so happy I'm going to be able to speak with the author for the next 30 minutes. Craig Unger is the author. He is, and he was the guy, he was on this story from the get-go. But the new book is titled Den of Spies, Reagan, Carter, and the Secret History of the Treason that Stole the White House. Craig, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you with us. CraigUnger.com, by the way, is the website, and Craig Unger, U-N-G-E-R, on Twitter. First of all, let's step back into the Wayback Machine. It's 1979, and the hostages are taken, I believe, on a year before, to the day almost, a year before Election Day of 1980. Am I remembering correctly?
Absolutely. I think it was November 4th, 1979. And it was a real crisis. The entire country, people, I mean, I guess a lot of your listeners probably weren't even born, but there were yellow ribbons tied around trees. There were pop songs about that. There was a countdown on the news every night, American held hostage up to, and it went on for 444 days. So it was the central issue of the 1980 presidential campaign. And the key thing was, if Jimmy Carter could bring the hostages home before the election, he would probably win, and if not, he would lose.
Right, and a broad consensus about that, I think, and because Carter had been, in some ways a very popular president. And then now, if I could just back up a little bit, we know now, since the LBJ files were released, about 15 years ago or so, that in 1968, Richard Nixon learned that Johnson and Humphrey had worked out a peace deal with the Vietnamese, both the North and the South, that was supposed to be consummated in Paris. And Nixon's people, Anna Chennault and company, reached out and blew up that deal, offered the South Vietnamese leader apparently a whole pile of money or something if they would blow up the deal, if they'd hold off until after the election. And there's that famous call where LBJ tells Everett Dirksen, they oughtn't to be doing this, Everett, this is treason. And Everett Dirksen, the grand old Republican leader, says, yes, or I agree, or something like that. So this is not the first time that a Republican president or a Republican who wanted to become president employed treason. Blew up actual negotiations by a federal government to steal an election. Am I remembering correctly, Craig?
Absolutely. In fact, it's the same issue you see in '68, in 1980, and again today. And people have often cited I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the act, but essentially it's an act of treason to hijack American foreign policy and use it for
the Logan Act?
Political, yes, and it's never really been used, but it's cited often. It dates back to 1799, yep. But people haven't been. It's never really been tried in court, and here you have. The first time where, it's not the first time, but they really seized American foreign policy and hijacked it, and in order to prolong the detention of American hostages. And I want people to think about that for a second. The Republican Party, which was not in power, was illegally sending weapons to Iran, and in return, they wanted the hostages to be incarcerated even longer.
Now, this is before the election. This was before Ronald Reagan took office. My recollection is that it was the spare parts for the American military equipment that we had sold to the Shah of Iran, which was now controlled by the Ayatollah. In fact, I think it was tires were being routed through Israel during the election campaign by Republicans. Am I remembering that right, Craig?
Yes, both Israel and Iran relied almost entirely on American military, and especially under the Shah, Iran had a huge military. But suddenly they were being attacked by Iraq, and they were running out of spare parts for their F-4 fighter jets, their C-130 cargo planes, and so forth, and the only place they could get them to Israel. And this set up a geostrategic sort of dilemma where Israel wanted Iran armed to fight Iraq. Iraq was attacking Iran, and there were good strategic reasons for this. But the upshot was that Israel participated in a covert operation to sabotage an American presidential election. And that is just sort of astounding. It's one of those taboo things that has never really appeared in the American press, and writing about it meant that you would get an awful lot of pushback, and that's what happened to me.
Yeah, did Netanyahu or his brother have anything to do with this?
No, they weren't really participating at that stage.
Okay.
Menachem Begin was the prime minister, and this was not long after the Camp David Accords. And even though that won the Nobel Prize for both Anwar Sadat of Egypt and for Israel. And it's a treaty that has lasted for more than 40 years. Israel was very angry that Jimmy Carter had forced them to give back the Sinai to Egypt. They wanted him out of office. They did not want him reelected. And here they were participating in this covert operation to get rid of him.
Wow, much like AIPAC is participating in American elections right now.
Right.
So you said they essentially took you down. I mean, tell us about what happened to you when you reported on this back in the day, and when was it that you first found out about this and reported on it?
Right. I first got into it in April of 1991, and the New York Times had a wonderful op-ed piece by Gary Sick, who was on Jimmy Carter's National Security Council, and it sort of gave me an outline. So I wrote a 10,000-word article that was the first major narrative about it in print. Newsweek immediately hired me afterwards to lead their investigation. A number of key people, like former Attorney General Elliot Richardson, were my sources, and Richardson told me, this makes Watergate look like a garden party. And yet, when I got to Newsweek, suddenly everything shifted in reverse, and everything that was reported was unreported. Newsweek did 3 stories in a row saying the October surprise didn't happen. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. And if you know anything about news, if you know anything about journalism, news is when something happens. When something doesn't happen, you generally don't write 3 stories in a row about it. So there was clearly
whitewash.
There really was, and it was a disinformation operation, and Newsweek and the New Republic led the way in shutting it down. Newsweek let me go, and I was actually sued by Reagan's former national security advisor, Bud McFarlane. And in general, almost any reporter who kept following it after that point was labeled a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, it's absolutely remarkable.